Hello and welcome to the Tennis Weekly podcast with Joel, Kim, and Chris. And today we have a very special episode for you. We're back for another book club, and we are lucky to be joined by the USA Today bestselling author Jenni L. Walsh. Jenni L. Walsh is an author of over 12 books. Her passion lies in transporting readers to another world, be it historical or in contemporary settings. She's a proud member of the Tall Poppy Writers, a graduate of Villanova University, and lives in the Philadelphia suburbs with her husband, daughter, son, and various pets. For adults, Jenni has written historical novels Becoming Bonnie, Side by Side, A Betting Woman, The Call of the Wrens, The Unforgettable Unsinkable, and the forthcoming Ace Marvel Spy, a novel of Alice Marble, which is the reason we are here today to talk all about it. But first, Jenni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We have to ask various pets. That makes me think, is it tortoises, parrots, exotic birds, or...
Not that exotic. My sister-in-law is actually a zoologist, so she's got the exotic. I have like the more standard. I have two dogs, both 100 pounds, a golden retriever and a Newfoundland mix. And then I have two cats, one very large. He's like 17 pounds, so he's amazing. And I guess the most exotic that we have are guinea pigs. We have two
Mhm.
of We actually last year fostered the mom and all her babies just for
Oh,
like a
wow.
fun experiment. And then we kept two of them. But I'm a ginormous animal lover and I like walk down the steps in the morning and I kind of feel like Cinderella. I'm like, hello, my friends, 'cause like the dogs and the cats are all there. So I just love being surrounded by them.
That
Well,
definitely
I'm
ticks the
I'm
box, doesn't it, of various pets.
I'm a big fan of golden retrievers, so I love that you have one of them, especially. And it's a little early on your side of the pond, Jenni, when we're recording this. It's actually just before the Christmas kind of break when
Mhm.
we're recording. So how are your preparations for Christmas going? Have you got all your presents wrapped yet?
I do not. I am a little behind. I have everything ordered and stashed away, hidden. I have two children, 11 and almost 9. He'll be 9 in 2 days, actually. So everything's here. It's just not ordered. And I am working on edits for my next book. So I'm kind of in that frazzled, frenzied, is it the holidays mindset right now?
I think a lot of our listeners will probably relate to that, to be fair,
Yeah.
as well. So, well, wishing you all the best with your Christmas when you get to it. But we are here today to talk about an incredible story, which is your latest book. We were both sent a copy of the book prior to our chat today. We absolutely loved it.
Thank
How
you.
has the response been so far to the book? I know it's not been released yet, but we've had Billie Jean King
Mm,
coming out, being a fan of it, calling it a smashing success, and
yes.
really saying that she loved the way that you brought tennis to life in the book. So, your book Ace Marvel Spy, a novel of Alice Marble. How has it been so far with the reaction you've had already?
It's been really great. People are really responding well to the book. It's funny, she was this well-known tennis player of the 1930s, like number one in the world. And there are many tennis players who play today who have no clue who Alice is.
Mm.
So it's been like eye-opening for me. I didn't realize that was the case. So it's just honestly been an honor to tell her story and make more people aware of this incredible woman.
I think that's a really good point because when it comes to the tennis side of things, probably it's important to provide a bit of context because some people may have heard the name. And if they haven't heard the name, they certainly will be shocked when we say some of these incredible things that she achieved just on the tennis court, which is only part of the book. But I mean, she was an American tennis player who won 18 Grand Slams between 1936 and 1940. And for the kind of the tennis stat heads who are listening, it was 5 in singles, 6 in women's doubles, and 7 in mixed doubles. She was ranked as highly as number one in 1939. She was the Associated Press Athlete of the Year for 2 consecutive years, which is obviously a huge deal. And she's in the International Tennis Hall of Fame. So, really, there are no excuses when it comes to that. But I mean, on the tennis side of things, are you now a tennis expert? Were you a tennis expert before? And how did you come about kind of finding this incredible story?
Yeah, I hope I don't get kicked off the show for saying this, but prior to the book, I knew very little about tennis. Growing up, my backyard actually like touched the schoolyard,
Mm.
and we had tennis courts there. So everyone in my family had a racket, and we would go up and kind of like hit the ball around here and there. But that was like kind of the extent of my experience. I grew up playing soccer. I went to
Mhm.
university playing soccer. So that was like my thing. But I will say, and I played midfield, and if anyone knows, well, I guess I should call it football, but if anyone knows football, like
Mm.
it's midfield's a lot of running, and I was known for my endurance.
Mm.
But anytime that I played tennis, it's a whole different type of endurance, and I give tennis players a whole lot of credit. Like it's exhausting.
It
So
really is, right? I mean, 5 sets, especially what I used to play back then, it was
yeah.
quite some feat. So, in terms of then not necessarily having the most tennis knowledge before you kind of started, I mean, Billie Jean King said that she thought you really brought to life the tennis scene so well. How did you go about kind of getting into the mindset of a tennis player, and what was kind of your research process for that?
Well, one of my best friends, Lindsay, she's an avid tennis player. So I spoke to her literally every single day about the book and about tennis, and she read every single word and she fixed a lot, which was incredibly helpful. But beyond that, like the first thing that I did was I read Alice Marble's memoir, and then I retyped the whole thing, like word for word, put it down in my manuscript so I could like almost, it's gonna sound weird, but almost like become her. Like her thoughts became mine, her movements became mine, and I just it became fully engrossed in her and her story. And then another thing that I did that I enjoyed so much was I got into the Netflix series. I think it was called Breakpoint.
Oh yeah.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And I was obsessed. I enjoyed all of the dynamics of the players, their social lives, like Nick Kyrgios and like all the drama around him. And I felt like I saw two sides of the coin with him. And I just the way that he played was so aggressive. So that was really interesting to see because Alice was a very aggressive player. And I love like the love drama between Matteo and Isla. And then, oh my gosh, there's so many players that I loved. Arena and her one
Yes.
at two Grand Slams by the time she was 25 to honor her father. So I was
Mm.
into that series. And I felt like because I was so invested in their lives, I was also picking up on like the minutia of like how they moved and how they played. Like Ons was such a strong player.
Mm.
So I just, yeah, I feel like that show really helped.
And can I just ask, how did you discover Alice's memoir in the first place? Like, what brought that to your attention?
It's actually kind of a funny story. So I have written in the past about some remarkable, strong women. I think that's kind of like my thing. I like to tell stories of women who haven't really been known or whose stories are almost like a misconception. Like my first book was about Bonnie Parker of Bonnie and Clyde infamy. And the way that she was portrayed by the media was almost completely wrong. So, I mean, there's no justifying what the Barrow Gang did over history, but it was interesting to actually learn what happened and then to retell that story in her voice, in her perspective. So that's been my career so far is telling these extraordinary stories of women. And I was approached by an author friend one day, and she was like, "You've written about so many great women. Can you help me brainstorm a list so I can show my agent and I can pick someone to write about?" I'm like, "Oh, absolutely. This will be so much fun." So I was like a kid in a candy store. I was Googling and helping her find different names and was going on the list. And during that deep dive into like this rabbit hole of women, I came across Alice. And I was like, okay, I was like, Janelle, you have to put Alice Marble on your list. And then as soon as I said that, I was like, no. I was like, I actually want her for myself. I was like, what did I do? I'm like,
Nice.
I want to tell this story. So I went and talked to my agent and I was like, okay, like and my agent's a tennis player. And I was like, there's a story of this woman. She was the best in the country, but she was also wrote for like the Wonder Woman comics. And then she was an international spy. And she's like, what? And she's like, and this story hasn't been told in a novel. And I'm like, no. So she immediately connected with my editor at HarperCollins, and my editor was like, "Yes, this is your next book. This story needs to be told." So then I had to go back to my friend with like, like the tail between my legs, and I was like, "Oh, I know I gave you this really great idea about this woman." And I was like, "But could I like have it back?" And she laughed, and she was wonderful, and she was like, "The story was always meant for you." So it's funny how I kind of stumbled upon it, but then just fell in love with Alice and her story.
Maybe it was kind of meant to be that it was, just she was discovered for yourself. And the book is called Ace Marvel Spy because there was so much more to Alice than just being a number one tennis player, which in and of itself is probably sufficient material for a book alone. But like you said, she was a comic book editor, she was a spy, so there's
Mhm.
no shortage of material. But how did you choose to focus on kind of those core areas and bring them to life in the book?
Yeah, she had a very eclectic life. She also was a singer. She had a talent agent. She was in movies. She designed her own sports clothing and sports equipment. Like she just honestly did everything. I almost felt like she was just kind of searching and searching in life. But for Ace Marvel Spy, I decided to focus. I have two timelines, two storylines, and the first one really focuses on her rise and her fall, and her rise and her fall in tennis. And then the second one is very focused on World War II and how she really wants to get involved and give back, and then eventually leads to her being this international spy.
And that's something that's so kind of interesting about the story is that you say that there are these different things that are happening and different sort of rises and falls in her life. And it feels like she's always kind of looking or maybe searching for the next thing, a bit of a restless spirit in some ways, I think would be, well, one of my takeouts is that she is kind of always having a lot going on and always kind of what would we say? Like not a finger in every pie is sort of an expression we'd say, but a master of all trades
Yes.
in that sense. But I mean, do you think that that's kind of representative of her as a person, that she is someone who likes to be able to do lots of things at the same time? Or was it more reacting to the situations that she was in?
You know what? Maybe a little bit of both. I felt like Alice, when she was growing up, her family didn't have the most means. So she probably felt like there was a little bit of like a glass ceiling to what she could do. And once she got a racket in her hand, it was actually like quote unquote late in life because she was 15. And a lot of the players back then come from tennis families or, went to boarding schools where tennis was played. So her starting at 15 was kind of late. And I think once she realized that she could do this well, it just opened up this whole new world for her. And I wonder if she wanted to just see what else she was great at, which happened to be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So I think she was searching.
And it feels like, if you do come to something a bit later and you're really good at it, I can totally understand why you'd think, well, what else could I do that I didn't
Mhm.
know I could do? But it does feel like there's almost the perfect sort of TV series that would be kind of a perfect fit for Ace Marvel Spy. And that's something, would you like to see it kind of be brought to life? You talked about Breakpoint. There seems to be having a real moment for these sort of tennis films and TV shows at the moment. Would that be something you'd be interested to see?
Oh my goodness, it would be a dream come true if I saw Alice on stage. And we are working with some partners, so cross our fingers that some things come to fruition there.
I mean, one of the things that I'm a big sort of history nerd myself, and I loved actually just the fact that her story, World War II is big influence, and you kind of did that as as a large part of the book. I've never really thought about what happened to tennis and the tennis
Right?
circuit and the players during the war. It's not something that is ever really talked about. And so I loved how you just unearthed that and sort of were mentioning some of her contemporaries and what they, went to do in the war. And it was this real sense that she was kind of wanting to do something and get involved. So what was it that you think mostly motivated Alice, and how did that change over the course of her lifetime, with the influence of the war?
Yeah, so when Alice took off with tennis and she got her coach kind of domineered everything in her life. She treated Alice much like a child. And I think when the war came around, Alice almost saw it as a chance to stretch her wings, to give back, to make a difference. Because before that, there's a moment in the book where she loves playing tennis and she loves being the center of attention, but she almost feels like that's it. Like she's just like people come to gawk at her, and she wants to do more than that. Unfortunately, she had some health problems along the way, and she literally knocked on every single door of the military, and they all told her, no, sorry, we can't because of like your health. And I think that was like a very hard thing for Alice because she really wanted to get involved, especially because there's moments that I didn't realize happened, like a bomb during the London Blitz fell straight through to center court of Wimbledon.
I had no
So
idea either. None.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
so
Yeah.
that was a big moment for her because like Wimbledon was her it was like this white rabbit for her. Like it was a huge thing that she was trying to achieve throughout her whole life, her whole tennis life. So I think when she was approached by the US military, the intelligence department was like, "Oh, hey, do you want to go to Switzerland and like pretend to play an exhibition? And but I really want you to spy on an ex-lover who might be up to some nefarious things that are helping the Germans." She was just like, "Yes, like I need to be involved in this way. Please send me."
And that is something that there's a lot of mystery around. So anyone who is familiar with Alice's story might also be familiar that there are these sort of question marks. And obviously, when it comes to those moments sort of in the intelligence, not everything will be recorded necessarily. But there are these fabulous stories that are told around this of her time where she was almost recruited in this sense for this exhibition. It does almost feel, I've talked about Alice's life being made into a TV series. It feels like this would be one of the centerpieces of the
Yes.
movie. This sort of like the romance, there's an ex-lover involved. I won't kind of give everything away, but how did you go about kind of taking on some of the question marks around some of the validity of her stories, and how did you approach that when writing the book? Because she did tell lots of stories and they're all brilliant stories to tell, but there is also sometimes a question mark around who really was Alice and is everything she said completely accurate?
Yeah, that was a very interesting dynamic of the book. I think Alice might have elaborated on some moments in her life, what she did, who she dated, who she was with, all those things. And there are a couple nonfiction books out there who break it down and shed light on what could be true and what could not be true. And I was very close to reading them. I ordered them, I had the books here, and then I decided not to crack the spine and go into them. And I decided that I was going to use Alice's memoir
Mm,
as like my Bible and like draw that line in the sand. And if she
mm,
said it was true, then I was going to go with it
mm,
and just like honor, I guess, honor the story that she wanted told about herself. Um, so
mm.
yeah, that's kind of like the line in the sand that I drew.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense because it feels like it's very much a case that bringing to life her story, and that's so much central to this rather than kind of picking apart things that may or may not be true that you actually probably wouldn't get to the bottom of that rabbit hole. Whereas if you go straight to source, you do have the stories that you can bring to life through this. And I mean, there are so many stories. I mean, there's the activism side of her as well. I believe she was the first female tennis player to wear shorts on court. Is
Yes.
that true?
Yes, it was such a big moment and she got a lot of backlash for it. Like this, okay, this kind of blows my mind, but during like the 1930s, 1920s when women were, really getting into tennis, it was almost seen as like taboo for a woman to jump. Like it was unladylike.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
it's so funny. The women today playing tennis are so powerful and so strong. And to imagine them having to like stay on their feet, it seems bonkers to me. But when Alice started playing, she was like, no, I'm going to jump and I'm going to wear shorts and I'm going to play this aggressive net game like the men play. And she kind of like put a 180 into tennis and like flipped the coin and she just paved her own way. And I just thought it was remarkable.
Yeah, definitely a real trailblazer. And I mean, we've come a long way, but we've still had in recent years scandal around, wearing red knickers at Wimbledon and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of still relatable, sadly, in some ways. But one of the other strings to Alice's bow was the fact that she edited, I believe, the Wonder Woman comic. Correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that aspect of her life?
Yeah, I feel like it was such an Alice thing. She was at a party, rubbing elbows with some powerful people. She taught tennis to a lot of very rich, famous actors and people who were people of influence. And she was in a room one day with this man, and he worked for the comics, and she brought up just like a comment about like, why do you not have any stories about these like influential women? And she name dropped a couple women and he had no clue who they were. And she was like, okay, well, these stories need to be told about these women. And he was like, okay, do you want to do it? So she kind of just walked her way into being this editor, and it ended up being called the Wonder Women of History. So she had her own column, and she told I'm going to blank on the number. It's funny because, when you promote a book, you're promoting a book that you wrote 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But I want to say that she probably wrote like 18 different comics about these extraordinary women. So I love that she did that.
There's a really nice connection there with yourself in terms of what you do, obviously telling these stories of women through history. And even in the kind of the Wonder Woman books, that seems to be something that also drove her. And so that kind of leads me to the question around which parts of Alice did you feel like you connected with most? And did you feel like with all these different hats that she had on, that you did get like a true sense as to who the real Alice really was?
Yeah, so one of the books that I read prior to this that I think helped with my mindset was Carrie Said I Was Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And she has a tennis player who's trying to get, I believe, all the Grand Slams in the same year. And she faces a lot of adversity and it's a lot of mental strength. And when watching Breakpoint, I felt like that was the biggest takeaway that I had as well,
Mm,
was mental strength of like staying in the game, staying focused, because once your mind goes, then everything goes with it. And I feel like I know that myself from playing soccer collegiately, and I've done a bunch of endurance races, marathons, triathlons, and it all comes down to your brain and
mm.
telling yourself that you can do it and staying focused. So I feel like that was one of those moments in the book that kept coming up again and again because I have a lot of action scenes where she's on the court and she's playing and she has to find that mental strength and like solitude to keep going. So I felt like we really connected on that when I was writing.
And just a sense of Alice after kind of the war and what became of her essentially. She didn't pass away until 1990. So she's had, quite a long amount of time after a lot of the activity. So what would you say, her kind of lasting legacy has been and just a little bit if you're able to share about kind of her final years as well.
Yeah, so I love that once she stopped playing tennis herself, she just wanted to give back to the sport. She coached Billie Jean King. She stood up for Althea when she wanted to play as a Black player. It was actually, there was something I wanted to include this in the book, but it felt like the natural ending to the book had already come, and I would have to kind of change the trajectory to include it. But there was moments where Alice wrote an open letter saying how like Athea Gibson should be playing and she's not and it's wrong and then Athea like responded and then like Alice responded again and it became this big national thing
Mm.
and then it ended up allowing Athea to play and I love that and she went on and she didn't win that year but she won eventually and I just thought that was remarkable so she gave back to the sport and she just kept pushing the boundaries of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. What a remarkable woman and a remarkable story. And we absolutely loved it. And we're sure that our listeners will when the book is released. And we can't wait to hear, more about what you're working on. I know you said that you end up promoting a book 2 years after you've written it. So does that mean you have another one in the works? Can you tell us any more about any future books you've got coming out?
Yeah, so I'm deep in edits on another book that I believe will be coming in October. So not that far in the future. We're kind of packing them in.
Yeah.
This one is about another real life woman. Her name is Sonora Carver. And I don't know if this film made it over the pond, but back in the 90s, there was a film called Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. And
Mm.
it was hugely popular here in the States, but it's about a woman who dives on horseback from 45 feet in the air into this like pool. And she does it in Atlantic City. And it's this huge attraction. It's like one of the first times it's, been done in America. And it was very inspiring, especially because Sonora has a tragedy while she's diving and she goes blind and then she has to hide the fact that she's blind and continue to dive. So her story was like
Wow.
childhood. So I loved it. So when I was trying to come up with something new to write about, I was like, oh, Sonora. I was like, I need to tell Sonora's story in a novel. Because it's remarkable. There was a film about her, and she also had a memoir, but never had it been fictionalized
Mm.
in novel form. So I feel like I was like, all right, it's mine. I'm doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to tennis, you said you watched Breakpoint, you got really into some of the
Yeah.
contemporary stories in the game. Is it now something that you keep a bit of an interest in? Are there any tournaments maybe you kind of watch, or any players that you're going to be following on the tennis circuit at all?
Yeah. So I was writing it in 2023, I guess. And I got really into Wimbledon that year.
Hmm.
And who was it? Was it Novak and Alcaraz in the
Yes.
finals? And I was so into that. And just like you said, the contemporary stories of like, the young gun and the legend playing each other. So I was really into that. So I watch Wimbledon every year now, and then the US Open because it's New York's only an hour from me. So but yeah, I love the sport now. And I think it's even more fun to watch because I understand the
Mm.
scoring. Because before I'd be like, oh, that looks fun. I'm like, wait, why did that just happen did it go up by 15, but not now this time it didn't go by 15, and why are they doing this again? So it was all confusing to me before, but now I'm like, I feel like I got the in. I know what's happening.
You've been allowed into the club with the knowledge that you have, right? But I think that's so interesting about what you said in terms of Breakpoint, obviously focusing around the mental side of the game. And I think people who have played sport to a high level, like you've talked about yourself, I think actually the mindset. Once you unlock the mindset of what tennis is about and this sort of like arm wrestle, this mental arm wrestle that they're going through on the court with themselves as well as with the opponent, I mean, it just makes it so fascinating. Some of the stories that we've mentioned, some of the big battles, there's always a storyline happening in tennis. And I think that's why people are always so interested in it. I think that's why this will have such a big audience because some of these stories are just so. I mean, the stories of today are pretty mind blowing, but this really is kind of like an absolute. I mean, it's an unbelievable story that Alice Marble has, and that kind of brings us to one of our final questions. We do ask all of our guests this. It is not tennis related. We are a British podcast. In case you hadn't realised, there are some British accents at work here. But we always, I know we always ask people how they take their tea. So I'll say that there are no wrong answers, just very wrong answers. If that makes you feel any better before you say
Well,
something.
now, okay,
No pressure.
Yeah.
I'm nervous because you're gonna think I'm wacky, but so I have recently gotten into tea because I was told not to drink caffeine anymore for
Hmm.
health reasons. So I drink, non-caffeinated tea,
Hmm.
and I've gotten really into, and I'm probably gonna say it wrong versus the British way, but so I've gotten into like chamomile tea.
Yes.
And since I'm over 40 and stressed and all of that, I add magnesium. So
Oh,
I
wow.
don't add sugar. I don't add
No
milk.
milk,
I just
magnesium.
add magnesium.
Wow, that is what you need to be able to kind of produce the books that you're doing and at the rate that you're doing them at, Jenny. I feel like if that works for you, who are we to judge, Kim?
Well, thank
No, and
you.
I'm also off the caffeinated tea at the moment. So chamomile is literally, I have it every single day. So
You
yeah, I
ticked the
know, I get
box.
where you're coming from, Jenny, on that
Nice.
one.
You get a pass with that. But
Thank you.
Jenny, it's been absolutely delightful having you on the podcast today. And listeners, we do hope you've enjoyed today's book club.
Ace Marvel Spy is available for pre-order now. The link to that is in the description and the show notes. And the book will be released the middle of January on the bookshelves, out in bookshops and online. So just in time for the Australian Open. And, I think this time of the year, especially, it's pretty cold outside. I'm a big fan of just curling up with a nice book. And I think will be the ideal winter read when it's released.
It will be indeed. And until that book comes out, you can learn more about Jenny and her books at jennylwalsh.com, or you can follow her on Instagram, Jenny L. Walsh. Jenny, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We wish you a very happy holiday season. We hope that it all goes to plan with the zoo that is in your house, and we hope the book is a huge success.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. And listeners, hope you've enjoyed it. We are going to be back in the new year with obviously all our regular catch up activity and bringing you all the action from the Australian Open. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and all major podcasting platforms out there. And if you like what you're hearing, then make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as well as a like and a subscribe to us on YouTube.
You can also follow us on social media, as well as following Jenni, of course. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and X. The handle for all of those is Tennis Weekly Pod. And after you purchased a copy of Jenni's book, why not purchase something from our merch store at etsy.com/shop/Tennis Weekly Podcast. You can also email the show, tennisweeklypod@gmail.com. Do let us know what you thought of the book, and we'll obviously pass that on. Any questions as well? We'd love to hear what you think about it. And also, you can check out our website, tennisweekly.co.uk.
And we'll be back for all the action from the 2025 season, which promises to be lively and interesting as usual. So I hope you can join us for that. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from Chris.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.